Hey Stormers, welcome to We Are the Storm, Part 8, Neoliberalism and the Corporatization of the Education System. Sounds fun, right? So this is going to be kind of a more academic video than the past videos. I want to try to explain why the government is insisting on pushing all these changes through. What is their goal and what is their motivation? Why are they doing this? To understand that, we have to understand what neoliberalism is and what its ultimate goal is and what it looks like in the world of education. First, I have to point out that I am by no means an expert on this subject. I started getting interested in neoliberalism around this time last year, mostly because of the election of Donald Trump, but even more so when I saw how the aspects of neoliberalism related to what was happening in education and healthcare in Nova Scotia. Those of you that know me know that I'm not a fancy person with my words, and while I was learning about these things, there were a lot of fancy words in the things that I was reading. So I'm going to try to explain this very academic topic in words that make sense to me. But if you do know about this subject, and please comment if you know that I've completely butchered it and that I should correct some things, because I probably am going to make some mistakes. I have included my favorite video about it, though. I have included a link in the description of this video that really helped me to understand what neoliberalism is. It's called Neoliberalism as a Water Balloon. If after watching this video, if I still don't make sense to you, please watch the video in the link, Neoliberalism as a Water Balloon. So I'm just going to begin. So basically, historically, what was happening, the threat of fascism rose in Europe, and World War II was fought. And after World War II, people began to believe that education could be used to build the ideals of democracy and equality. Before World War II, school was kind of a factory model that was began in industrialization. As factories were built, schools began to look like factories. And their whole goal was to bring people into the workforce. After World War II, it became more important to hone students' problem-solving skills and critical thinking skills, so that the ideologies that, like fascism, that threatened democracy, would never rise again. It was believed that education should be accessible to all kinds of people. Like race, gender, or socioeconomic background did not affect their ability to learn. These ideas we kind of take for granted nowadays, but they were quite revolutionary at that time. So public schools were seen as a way to reach the most people and teach the majority of the population. Teaching the majority of the population was an important way to preserve the ideals of democracy. The idea that school was for everyone and everyone had the potential to learn became the norm in North America. But in the 70s and 80s, things began to change. An ideology that was on the rise it sort of began as an economic idea, neoliberalism, but it eventually infiltrated all aspects of society. It's an ideology that basically believes that everything should be controlled by the free market economics. That everything is a commodity, including our children. The goals of neoliberalism are privatization, deregulation, and decentralization. A lot of people get confused with the term neoliberalism and the term liberal. That they're not linked, in the sense that not all liberals believe in the neoliberal ideals. I believe our government does. But anyhow, so they believe liberalism believes in privatization, deregulation, and decentralization. So to be clear, neoliberalism, wants everything, including healthcare and education, to be privatized, deregulated, and decentralized. Like I said, I believe that our government runs on neoliberal ideals. Their goals are to privatize, deregulate, and decentralize. Neoliberals believe schools should be run like businesses. I believe our government wants that too. They believe they should be businesses and compete for pupils. Neoliberals want deregulation and privatization. You'll be able to recognize them by the topics that they focus on during an election. They will talk about how the government should create a business-friendly society. And although they will never come right out and say it, they believe that the government should be at an arm's length away from social programs. They believe that the government should not provide public services such as education, health, and welfare. They believe that people will meet their needs through the free market economy. In other words, they believe that if you work hard, you will be rewarded with enough money to pay for all of those services, and that they will no longer have to be public. How much they will cost will be determined by the free market. So if you can't pay for them, right? Every aspect of society has been, if in a neoliberal world, has been deregulated. So the banks will be deregulated, and so they'll give you credit, right? They'll allow you to put yourself in debt that you can't come out of, or the generation after you, or the generation after you, so that you can pay for the services. So I know it sounds scary, and it is scary. And some of you are like, oh man, this is just out there. It's one of Rachel's conspiracy theories. I don't think so. Look at what's happening in the United States and think about what's happening here as I talk. This is happening all over the world. Here is how a government would begin to bring neoliberalism into our public schools. They would do a mass education reform with so much sweeping changes that we wouldn't quite know how to respond. Tell me if any of this sounds familiar. The first step is to tell the public that the education system is failing their children. Check. I would say so. Well, the Nova Scotia government has been doing this for years. Even though our students score mid-range in our country, even though our students are the lowest funded, they score in the middle of our country. There is a very clear argument that can be made that we should be making to our government if they really want to see Nova Scotian students do better than they are right now. There's a very clear argument to be made. It's not our education system that is failing the students, it's our funding system that is failing our students. Give more money per student, and perhaps those mid-range results will go up, because there's nothing wrong with their ability, and there's nothing wrong with their teachers. The second step is to get all levels of the mainstream media to sell that idea to the public. Well, that's definitely happening. I hear it every day on my way to work, every day on my way home, every time I turn on the TV, every time I read a newspaper. I hear about how teachers are failing students. And especially, watch over the next 3 weeks all of the media and see how they're shaping the discourse of the public. And why are they motivated to do that? If they're not working, if they're not biased. Third step. Begin mass implementation of standardized testing. That's definitely happening. And according to this legislation, it's going to happen even more. That accountability word. The fourth step. Manipulate those test results to undermine the teaching profession. What does that mean? Well, they will say that teacher quality is the biggest factor in the results of the standardized tests. Not poverty or nutrition or cultural bias in the tests or the environment or the lack of family doctors or recreational programs in the community or affordable housing. None of those things, but teacher quality will be what they say affects the test results. Schools that score higher will be considered the better schools with the better students. And students will compete to enter those schools. Schools that score lower will have a harder time attracting students. Therefore, those schools will have less money coming in because tax dollars will come in per student, right? Schools will continue to be funded by a head count. So schools that score lower will have less funding. That's not, like, isn't it that schools that need help should be given more money to help those students? Those schools will eventually close because of it, and the children of these communities will have to travel even farther than they do now on their buses. Often, or their parents will have to drive them. Either way, it will be at their own expense, most likely, to get to school, because the community schools will close in the rural areas. The fifth step of the implementation of neoliberalism in the education system is to get rid of anyone who resists the government's plan. If this legislation is passed, there will be a mass exodus of teachers from this province. A lot of teachers will leave, and there will be a major teacher shortage. So in the near future, we'll be able to put a check beside this step as well. And don't put it past them to punish and maybe even fire the teachers who spoke out against this legislation. Sixth step: remove or ignore community voices. Well, the elimination of democratically elected school boards was a big part of this step. Step 7. Take over the teachers' professional entities. The establishment of the College of Teachers, the total disregard for collective bargaining with our union, and even the plans to change the contract that they legislated us into, because that's what they're about to legislate, changes to what they legislated us into. And their clear intent to weaken our union are all under that heading, right? Step 8, destabilize teachers' jobs by bringing in performance pay. So let's imagine that the kids at Glooskap score lower on the standardized tests that they bring in than the students at KCA. The teachers at KCA would be paid more for getting those results out of their students. Teachers would, as soon as they got the seniority, would leave schools like Glooskap so that they could get to schools like KCA so that they could make more money for their own families. Because we're all going to need more money if things start to get privatized, right? So who would work at Glooskap if that was happening? Well, step 9 is to bring in cheap, untrained teachers. They are already hiring untrained teachers or non-teachers as subs in some boards in Nova Scotia. So this part has already begun. One day, someone who is not trained at being an educator will be teaching your children. the public school system is going to get so bad that even the poorest communities in Nova Scotia will start to think that maybe paying a little bit of money out of their own pocket to get their child to school, into a good school, is the only way for them to have a better life, so it's worth it. Right? And how will they afford to do that? Well, the banks will give them credit to pay that. And then they will carry debt, and their generations below them will inherit that debt. And that brings us to step 10. So after things have gotten so bad that everyone thinks it's a good idea, step 10 will happen, which is the privatization of education. There will be no public system. That is the hope of neoliberalism, and that's the steps, and that's what it will look like. Bookmark this video, especially if they get this legislation put through. Bookmark this video. Mark the date down. What is it? 10/14. 10/14, February 16th, 2018. If they become privatized, then businesses can finally make the money off education system that they have been coveting for 50 years. So who runs the businesses? Well, the very, very wealthy. So the very, very wealthy will continue to get more wealthy off of the destruction of our social safety net. This is the end game of neoliberalism. And in my opinion, it is the end game of the donors and our liberal government. This is their end game for healthcare too. They want that privatized as well. And they will fund it off of our debt and our credit. So I plead with you, people that are watching, my fellow Nova Scotians, you deserve better than this. And you work far too hard for this to happen. You deserve a family doctor. You deserve a public school system. You deserve a public funded healthcare system. You deserve affordable housing. You deserve a $15 minimum wage, not a 15-cent raise on the minimum wage, a $15 minimum wage. In fact, you deserve a living wage, a livable wage. They will tell you that we can't afford that. Yes, we can. There are many ways for us to have these things. They will try to say that our economy can't support it, can't sustain that. Not with the neoliberal philosophy, it can't sustain it. No, it can't. But there are ways that we can have all these things. How? Well, the first step is believing that we are worth it, and that we are worth having these things. And the second step is fighting in peaceful but effective ways to make our government work for us. Stay tuned tomorrow for my last video for a while, where we can explore ways to convince the government to change their ways. I look forward to making that one, and I hope that you'll still be watching. So please check out the link attached to the description in this video. It was a really helpful little YouTube movie that I watched that helped me understand how neoliberalism works. Good night, and remember, together we are the storm.